this morning for this, and I'm sure that many will see us after the fact as well in the on our videos that are shared after the sessions for national focal points and for site managers. This obviously concerns mainly the chapters 4 and 12 of the periodic reporting questionnaires, and our colleagues from the advisory bodies will share with us case studies of how to determine factors for natural, cultural, and mixed heritage. And so I would rather begin with a brief overview of what the factors are in the convention in general and in the questionnaire in particular, and how they relate to other aspects of World Heritage Management. And so for a bit of background and factors, I think many of you will be familiar with the ideas of factors affecting the property, if only because they constitute an important part of today's nomination dossiers. If I'm going to just quickly share my screen as usual. And so if you look very briefly here at paragraph 132 of the operational guidelines, all of our favorite text, you'll see that the nomination dossiers require a number of things to be considered complete. And we're looking at paragraph 132, which says that it needs to contain a state of conservation and factors affecting the property. And so already at the nomination stage, you are expected to identify these factors. And so you are asked to include accurate information on the present state of conservation of the property and a description of the factors affecting the property, including threats. This gives us the first clue about factors, which means that if it includes threats, it also includes positive things. And this constitutes baseline data, as it does in the periodic reporting exercise, necessary to monitor the state of conservation of the property. And as you can see, the nomination dossiers also need to include a section on monitoring, where states parties shall include key indicators that are in place or proposed to measure and assess the state of conservation of the property, the factors that affect it, the conservation measures, and the periodicity of their examination, which is to say how often they do it, and the identity of the responsible authorities. And this, if you have started already filling out section 2 of the questionnaire, this will look very familiar already, because we essentially ask the same question coherently after inscription. As properties undergo periodic reporting, they have to report on the same information. And the format for nominations, and this is where things can get a little bit confusing. If we go to Annex 5 of the operational guidelines, which is somewhere around here, I believe, too far, it does also in the big table that we will find shortly. I apologize for the visual clutter of the OGs, but I do like to go into the same documents that we all look at every once in a while. So this is the big table that lists all of the requirements for nominations, and you will see that it has its own factors section, which is 4B, and it lists a number of factors. And these are not the periodic reporting factors, but they are in fact a list of threats. They are development pressures, environmental pressures, natural disaster and risk preparedness, and visitation at World Heritage Sites, which, as we know, can be a good or a bad thing, as well as the population density within the property and buffer zones, all of which are factors that can affect the property. The factors in that list are largely negative in nature or potential threats to the OUV of the property, the idea being that you can also highlight the ones throughout your nominations dossiers, and that threats can be also have a positive impact on the properties. And the fact is that over time our approach to factors has evolved, and our idea of factors has evolved. The current nomination format and the current periodic reporting idea is to accept that factors are multifaceted in many ways, and that they are able to contain the good and the bad, negative and positive, sometimes both at the same time, and that they can change in nature over time as well. And this is very much the spirit of chapter 4 of the periodic reporting questionnaire, which you will be familiar with by now. So let's go to our chapter 4 and have a quick look at what we are encountering there. So chapter 4, we are here in the demo version as always for these presentations. The factors affecting the property, the idea is to gather the information on factors affecting the property and ask you to report on them, and we'll see exactly how this is done. The chapter provides you with a generic list of factors that have been identified to outline factors that could affect all types of World Heritage properties. They are grouped into 13 headings, which are then also briefly explained. As you can see, the first one being buildings and development. Each factor is given a sub-chapter, so it will go from 4.1 to all the way to 4.13. And you have a quick description of these factors. Now, where do these factors come from? They were developed, in fact, as part of the revision of the questionnaire in between cycles 1 and 2 of periodic reporting. And so that was back in 2008. And the committee adopted the standard list as well as an outcome of the revision period. There is a specific page on factors that exists, which is wh-periodicreporting factors right there, which gives you the complete list of factors affecting the properties. You will see that they are, in fact, the same as your periodic reporting questionnaire. They are, so your 13 headings are these ones, and we will go into the individual ones in a second. To ensure a consistent approach, and this was absolutely key for this revision, for all of the properties that are examined through the different processes of the convention, the list of factors and threats of the periodic reporting questionnaire is also used in the state of conservation information system, which is the SOC database, which many of you will be familiar with. It is right here, and this lists all of the cases that are reviewed by the World Heritage Committee and have been reviewed since the very beginning of the convention. All of them are included in this database, and you can search by property, by threat, and you will see here if you go. Now, in an ideal world, we would have called them factors, but the idea is the same. It is buildings, development, transportation, infrastructure, and so on. So you recognize the same list. We use a coherent approach between the two so that one system is linked to the other. And in fact, if you go back to the questionnaire here. Now, this is a demo questionnaire, so it is not actually attached to anything, but you can see here that if your property has been subject to a state of conservation report to the World Heritage Committee, there will be a link here that will open up the relevant entries in the SOC information system, so this one. And that will show you the factors that have been recognized by the committee as affecting the property. And the databases use the same, and they are meant to interconnect as well, which should make your work a lot easier. If the property is in what we call the SOC system, then essentially a good part of the identification for the factors. And we will ensure that our colleagues from ICOMOS, ICOM, and IUCN will come back to this as well. Just a quick point on on the factors. You do have As always, you have guidance throughout the questionnaire, either here or as you go. We will see throughout the questions. The guidance is provided directly here in many cases for the factors. So the individual examples for each factor are provided in the little blue squares, and you also have the guidance material that is made available by the World Heritage Center as a PDF, and it is integrated into the questionnaire as well. So the first step of every factors assessment is to determine whether or not the factor is considered relevant or not relevant. So for instance here, let's assume that our mystery property is affected by commercial development. We would click relevant. As you click relevant, the box underneath pops up, which asks you a number of questions to identify and qualify the factor that you have identified as being relevant to the property. You will need to decide first and foremost whether that impact is positive, negative, or both. Depending on your assessment, you will then need to fill out each line of this questionnaire for the positive and the negative aspects. The first assessment that you make is whether the impact is current or whether it is potential, which is to say that it may affect the property in the future. You are then asked about the origin of the factor that affects the property. So is it located inside the property? And by that we mean inside the boundaries of the property itself, as defined at the time of inscription, or is it located outside of the boundaries of the property, which it does very much include any buffer zones and extended areas. Then you will be asked to identify the trend for this factor. Is it decreasing, is it stable, or is it increasing? This will be especially interesting as well for the properties that undergo a number of cycles of periodic reporting over the years, to see how these trends are evolving, how they're predicted to evolve, and how they actually evolve. So you will fill this out for every factor that you feel is relevant. As you have seen, the factors are grouped by thematic, by the 13 thematic points, and then you have the individual factors that you identify afterwards, and then you fill it out. See, for instance, here this has been done already. So for our mystery here property, major visitor accommodation and associated infrastructure was considered a positive factor that is currently affecting the property outside of its core inscribed area, and it is considered a stable positive trend. You could also have increasing positive trends. As always, for every single set of factors and every family, you have the opportunity to comment on the information that you have provided in the text fields. So you then go through all 13 factors one by one, and as you can see in the navigation tree up here, you go through all of the groups: buildings and development, transportation, infrastructure, etc., 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 all the way through management and institutional factors. There is a 14th chapter in the questionnaire, which allows you to identify other factors that are not part of the 13 identified families of factors that you have reported on. This also exists in the State of Conservation database, so you can list here any other factors that affect the property that may not be covered by the list of factors themselves. Once you have done all of this, please do not forget to click Save, and you can move on to the next chapter, which is 415. 415 is very easy for you because it is in fact an automatically generated list. The idea is that you have just filled out, it's spread over 2 pages, all of the factors, so it's a lot of information left and right, and it's particularly easy to see how it all fits together. So you get at 4:15 a summary of all the information that you have provided, and it is automatically generated once you have saved the data previously, and you go, as you see, by category and then individual factors with the icons for the impacts and origins and trends that you have identified. So this is very easy. This gives you an opportunity to review, make sure that everything is correct and coherent. And as you can see, you have one line for positive, one line for negative, and the assessments that you have provided. There is a legend at the end as well. Then we get to move on to question 4:16, which asks you to provide a more in-depth assessment of current and potential positive and negative factors. And so we go back to this, and you get an automatic table, as you can see, based on the information that you have already filled out, which is the first little square here at the top. You have impact, origin, trend again, and then you are asked to provide further information along a series of criteria. The first one is spatial scale, which asks if the area affected by the factor would be restricted, which is to say that it concerns less than 10% of the property's area. Localized, which is to say between 11 and 50%, extensive between 51 and 90%, and widespread, which is between 91 and 100%. All of this information is as well in the guidance, which gives you again the examples from the committee's list of factors, but also you have all of this information on the scales and the assessment. You have it up here in the header of the chapter question. So you get to fill this out, identify how much of the property is affected. You are asked about the temporal scale, or how the factor occurs over time. Is it a one-off or rare occurrence? Does it occur intermittently, frequently, or on an ongoing basis? You are asked as well about impact on the attributes, whether it's significant, minor, significant, or major. And then you are asked about management response to rate the capacity of management to respond to negative or positive factors, which is to say staff time, resources, financial allocations and budgets, the availability of knowledge and technical capacities, and all of this gets bundled into high, medium, low, or no capacity and resources. And finally, you are asked whether how the trend is expected to develop over the how the trend has evolved over the last 6 years. Has it been decreasing, static, or increasing? And that is a series of questions that you will be asked for every factor that you have identified previously, and then this is pulled from the answers to question 4.1 to 4.13. In both cases, for questions 4.15, your automatic table, and 4.16 that we are looking at right now, any other factors that you have added do not get pulled into this assessment. The tables automatically only pull the things that are programmed into the questionnaire, which is to say the official list of factors. So the assessment, if you want to provide it, can be done in the comments sections at the end of each section. As you can see, it's quite a lot of scrolling before we get to the end of this chapter, and you will have, as always, you have the possibility in question 4.14 to fill out any details about this. 4.17 is particularly important for serial inscriptions, which is both at the national level or at the transnational level. For those properties, as you know, serial properties only fill out one questionnaire, regardless of their size or the number of countries involved, and they fill it out for the entire property. A serial inscription is considered a single property. And so therefore the individual component sites are all bundled up in terms of reporting. And in 417, you have the possibility of specifying which component site is affected by which factor if this is necessary. And you have the possibility of doing this. And you have, as you can see in the guidance, the definition not just of factors, but also of serial properties, should you have any doubt. And you get to provide this detailed information here. It is not provided in the list of factors themselves. These concern the entire property and not individual components. The last part of the long chapter 4, as you see, it's one of the chunkiest parts of the questionnaire, is a bit of a prediction exercise on the state of conservation, what you expect the results to be the next time that the property undergoes periodic reporting, which would be cycle 4, very much in the future for us at this point. And you are asked to predict what the state of conservation of each attribute will be approximately 6 years from now, more realistically 7 or 8. You will recall that we have discussed how to define outstanding universal value and attributes of outstanding universal value during a previous session. The list here you will need to fill out, and it will please need to be coherent with the answers that you have given in chapter 3. And for each attribute, you then identify whether it is preserved, compromised, seriously compromised, or lost according to the criteria. Preserved is fairly obvious. Compromised means that there is some loss of alteration that has already occurred, but that the attributes are not persistently or substantially affected by any of the factors. Seriously compromised means that there is a significant reduction in the significance of this attribute for the property, and loss means that there is a loss of almost all the significance of this specific attributes due to various factors. And so this is a prediction exercise, so this is not current. This is what you expect the situation will be in 6 or more years by the time you undergo this cycle again. So we will see how all of this affects the rest of the questionnaire in a little bit. But for now, I'm very happy to pass the floor to our colleagues from the advisory bodies. We have Katrin Zischka from IUCN, Eugene Zhou from ECOM, and Richard McKay from Ecomos International. I'm very happy are joining us today, and I believe that they will provide us with some case studies of what it means to identify factors. And I will, if the thing lets me, I will try and stop sharing my screen now and hand over to them. Thank you very much, and I'll be back about chapter 12 a little bit later.
Thank you, Anatole. I presume I can go on, or should I wait?
No, absolutely. You're free to take the floor and lead us through.
Okay, excellent. Let's see. Let me first thank you all, and allow me to say hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Eugene Zhou. I hope you're seeing my screen with the slide. This is an okay, good. This is an integrated presentation coming from from all 3 advisory bodies. So Richard from Ecomos and Kathy from IUCN will be going right after me, and hopefully we'll manage to share one integrated slide without fumbling too much technologically. It's very nice to meet you all, albeit virtually, and I just wanted to give you a very brief outline of what to think about in terms of factors affecting the property. Anatole just led you through the whole range of questions that you need to go through, and also how that connects to the different threats that are identified in various different reporting processes within the World Heritage Convention. So what you tick now and what you identify now is also shared amongst the state of conservation reports, but also different mechanisms that are activated within the World Heritage system. But I think this kind of a full full-fledged list of the threats, and by all means, these are the factors, and we call them threats because we generally think them to be negative. But as was mentioned before, I think all of these factors can have both negative and positive outcomes, impacts. So please make sure that you think about both sides of the coin when you are actually thinking about different factors affecting the property. This list is very useful because you can actually use them as prompts to think about your particular site. Some of them may not be apparent right now, but as you go through the list, it may sort of click with you to think that maybe actually there could be a underlying problem somewhere where it's not visible right now, but it could become very important in coming years or even coming months. So I think the whole purpose of thinking about factors is not just to look at the property right now and analyze the current state as you see it, but trying to analyze where the origin of the issues lie. So always think that, yes, it's also something that can happen right now on site visibly, but also those underlying issues that actually cause and is the origin of these different management issues. So in order to sort of strike a little bit of more stimulus for all the site managers and the national focal points out there, I just wanted to change the perspective a little bit and think about why we're doing this in the first place. The periodic reporting is not supposed to be a dreary exercise, let's say, of trying to click all the right answers. But it's actually supposed to be a tool to help you think about what it is that you need to manage and why you are managing it. So just to think of it from a management perspective, the different types of heritage sites that you are supposed to be taking care of. Now, this is a hypothetical pictogram of a hypothetical landscape and a place somewhere in the world, and we try to merge all these different aspects as much as possible to make it not so identifiable to a specific place. But it's important that when you're thinking about your place, it's actually not just a heritage site, but it's actually a part of a larger landscape, as you have just seen here. So it would be much better that you take in the large landscape and then zoom into the heritage place that you are actually taking care of and responsible for. And if you look at this diagram, what we've done, and when I say we, I mean actually the World Heritage Leadership Program, which is working all in collaboration with the World Heritage Center and the advisory bodies to update the management manuals, is to say that when you look at a heritage site, it's not just the heritage that is designated or inscribed on the list. You have to think about the values and the attributes that identify the heritage, but you need to think about what kind of people and communities live there. You have to think about the different social contexts, the economic context, and what kind of natural environment that the site is placed within. And these contexts play a very big role in trying to find what the factors are that could affect the property. There might be people who are living off on the different environmental context or directly off from the heritage itself, such as subsistence farming or with tourism benefits. So it's also important to understand what kind of services and benefits are derived out of this site that you are managing. And then, of course, you need to think about the various different boundaries and the wider setting of the heritage site, and what kind of long-term strategic direction that you're headed towards in actually managing your site. And I just wanted to confirm once more that when you're thinking about factors affecting the property, you need to go way beyond the designated boundaries of the heritage site. Yes, the immediate responsibility is, of course, within the property area and, of course, within the buffer zone of the designated World Heritage Site, but that does not mean that the factors that could impact the OUV will always arise from within. So there is this distinct section in the periodic reporting questionnaire which says, where does it originate from? Is it from within the site or from outside of the site? And more often than not, I think we see a lot of the factors actually originate from outside of the boundaries that could have a very detrimental impact to the OUV and the site. So I'm just going through hypothetical diagrams at the beginning just to liven up the spirit. But Kathy and Richard will go immediately after me to illustrate with much more real life case studies, so they get to have all the fun. But just to give you an idea about the different boundaries concepts, I'm stealing a slide that we used to use for impact assessments. But basically, what can happen very much upstream of a river will definitely impact the protection and management of a particular site that is located much more downstream, regardless of whether or not that development or change is happening within the boundaries or it's outside of the boundaries. So the boundaries are an administrative tool, but factors don't always respect human administration. So I urge you to think outside of the box as much as possible when you are going through this. Now, this is a hypothetical landscape, the same diagram, just in black and white. And here, although it may seem all normal, we can actually zoom in to see three, maybe four different World Heritage properties. Now, I think the whole perspective of us always starting from, oh dear, what's happening? Sorry, am I still sharing?
It's back. It's back.
Okay, good. Sorry. So the whole perspective of us always starting from the heritage place might not be so effective when we're talking about factors. When we're talking about factors, it's actually better to zoom out, go macro, and then zoom into your heritage place. 3 different World Heritage properties. One is a monastery situated in a sacred mountain that also could be a volcano. One is an industrial heritage located in an urban area, and one could be a marine ecosystem along the coastline of the area. Now, the issue is, although the industrial landscape in red is the actual World Heritage property, and the buffer zone in blue protects it very well, the issue is that the factors that actually have an effect and have an impact on the property itself could actually come from a much larger landscape. The raw materials that come from the agricultural landscape, that actually feeds the industrial process, the consumers of the factory's products from the town, and also perhaps the iconic building shapes of that particular industrial factory or the infrastructure could have a dominating presence in formulating the views of the town. And also, in order to service the industrial plant or production, there could be different road infrastructures that are stemming from it and actually making sure that transportation can happen towards it. So these are all the different aspects that are supporting the World Heritage Site and that you need to take into consideration when you're talking about factors and also boundaries. When we're talking about marine ecosystems, there are so many interdependencies about the watershed area, or sometimes there could be microclimate created by the coastal mountain range or on subsistence fishing practices. And this could actually encompass a much wider area that could directly impact the site. It's also possible that some of the pollution coming from agricultural activities or industrial activities happening from a nearby area could very much impact the site. We talk about religious heritage in a monastery. It's not just that location, but it's perhaps the view of that particular sacred mountain looked at from a very distant city or an urban area, or It could be the arrival routes of the pilgrims coming to that sacred place. And it could be sometimes over-tourism of that particular place that is impacting the heritage. So just to make sure that we're always thinking outside of the box and looking at the heritage in the context of what the values and the attributes are, and then linking that to the socio-economic and environmental context is very important. So when we do talk about World Heritage properties, and I think this would go very well for the national focal points, is that they're not in isolation. Their buffer zones and their property supporting contexts would very much overlap in between them, and that in essence, the different communities and different people that interact with these places can also be very much shared and moving along in order to play different roles. So just to make sure that we put heritage in the context of society and environment and view it from that point of view. So rather than putting it into isolation like this, let's take a macro scale and zoom out and make sure that we can look at it from a different point of view. Now I'm going to hand over to Richard so that he can actually go through real life case studies. And, oh wow. Richard, you have the control now.
Oh. Thank you, Eugene, and good evening or good morning, colleagues. Just by way of setting the scene about the specific factors, it's very relevant to remind everybody that in signing the convention, state parties to the World Heritage Convention have undertaken to protect and conserve their World Heritage properties, and therefore it's entirely appropriate, indeed necessary, that properties properties that are subject to activities which may have a potential impact should be subject to appropriate impact assessment. So a lot of the examples that are about to be presented by myself and by Kathy Zizka from IUCN relate to activities with potential to impact, so factors that may threaten rather than necessarily do threaten World Heritage values. Now, I don't know how to get this slide to go to the next.
I don't know, maybe press enter.
Yes, success. What I'm proposing to present now is a series of the standard factors. They're not quite in the same order as the UNESCO website, and then IUCN will do the same. Now, for many cultural World Heritage properties, particularly those in urban contexts, it is buildings and developments that are often the factors that most affect or have potential to affect the property. And new structures particularly can affect the attributes that contribute to the universal value. So in this context, we're talking about things as ordinary as housing or major commercial or industrial developments, or things like new visitor facilities, perhaps even internal World Heritage properties or infrastructure. And the example that I've shown on screen relates to the historic centre of Vienna, which is, amongst other things, important because of the historic views and vistas and the consistency of the scale and townscape. And these attributes are reflected in the statement of outstanding universal value. And you can see arrowed on screen a proposal for a large building, which will change the, if built, will change the urban morphology. So this is a good example, and it's a development which was influential in the inscription of this property on the list of World Heritage in Danger. But it is an example of the capacity of new development, new built form, to change the attributes and therefore affect the outstanding universal value of an inscribed property. However, as Eugene has said, it's not necessarily a development within the property, there can also be developments, for example, within the buffer zone. And this is an example from the Villa Adriana in Tivoli. And in this case, you can see on the screen, there is the inscribed property. The inscribed property itself is outlined, and there is a wider buffer zone. In this case, there was a proposed development within the buffer zone, and the state party, to its credit, undertook a heritage impact assessment which realised that even though this was outside the property, it would fundamentally affect some of the aesthetic attributes of the property that contributed to OUV. And this is an example of the system at work, because the development was abandoned in light of its heritage impact. Now, I haven't touched anything, Michelle, is that?
I don't know what exactly it is, but I think it will reset in a moment. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah. Thank you. Then again, it's not only necessarily within the property or the buffer zone. There may also be developments that can affect the property from within the wider setting. Here we have a view of the Tower of London in the United Kingdom, and you can see beyond there are a number of structures, not all of which are actually built, at least one of which is proposed. And these new structures, even though they may not be within the property, they may not be within the buffer zone that has been specified, may nevertheless affect the views or the visual setting. They change the urban form, and they can therefore affect the integrity and authenticity of the property and its values. There are a range of other attributes that can affect the property as well. For example, transportation infrastructure is one of the standard factors that UNESCO and the World Heritage Centre website identify. And these can be good servants, but dangerous masters. The example on screen is a proposed tunnel underneath the World Heritage property at Stonehenge, again in the United Kingdom. Now, on the one hand, the existing property, as you can see in the small photograph on screen, is bisected by a road on the right-hand side of that image. And having a major highway through a cultural landscape is, of course, an impact, and there is an opportunity to improve the effect of that impact by removing the road. The problem in this case is that the proposal for the tunnel, as you can see in the diagram above, the dotted section of the orange line, is that the tunnel is only within part of the property, not within the whole property, and therefore, while the area adjacent to the monument at Stonehenge might be improved, there are some large culverts proposed at either end of the property. So this is an example of a transportation infrastructure project which has both a positive and a negative impact, and it's a matter of the most recent decision of the committee, that the committee regards the impact of the tunnel as proposed as having an inappropriate and unacceptable effect on OUV. So proposals such as tunnels or roads or bridges, airports can have positive effects, but they can, as well as addressing impacts, they can, of course, create impacts. And as many will know, it was in fact a piece of transportation infrastructure, a bridge in Dresden, that resulted in the only removal of a cultural property from the World Heritage List some years ago. Another one of the standard factors relates to the physical condition of the fabric of the place. And for many cultural and mixed sites, it is, of course, the fabric of the place, its physicality, which expresses its outstanding universal value. So whether it be an intact and occupied adobe residence, as we see in Timbuktu here on the left of screen, or an evocative ruin, in this case the Square Tower from Mesa Verde in the United States, The physical integrity of these structures is absolutely integral to their ability to demonstrate their outstanding universal value in physical terms. It strikes right at the heart of the integrity and authenticity of the cultural properties, and therefore anything which is causing or threatening to cause degradation to the physical fabric is a factor affecting the property which would need to be exposed. These may be natural features, these may be the results of human activity, could be slow and incremental, something such as erosion, or they could be the impact of visitation tourism, or indeed an absence of activity, a lack of maintenance. Any of these factors, if they are going to result in degradation of the fabric, need to be identified and reported as part of the periodic reporting process. Tourism, of course, is a major issue, and it falls within the group of factors that are described as social and cultural uses of heritage. There are, of course, many other social and cultural uses. World Heritage properties are important sacred sites, religious properties, but something that affects a very large number of World Heritage properties is the implications of tourism, which can, of course, be enhanced and at the same time exacerbated. So tourism offers an opportunity to showcase the values. For some communities, tourism provides additional economic benefits, but there can also be local social impacts and effects on local people. Especially this is problematic where there are traditional custodians, associated communities who are affected or are displaced. And so what we find with tourism is that while tourism is something that is absolutely a fulcrum within the context of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, tourism and World Heritage has a paradox. Tourism can greatly enhance and be the good servant, but it can also be a dangerous master. And it is highly desirable that some considerable thought and analysis go into understanding the effect of tourism on the property, what is happening now and what may happen, because it's the early identification and early intervention that allows tourism to be managed in a way that it enhances and communicates World Heritage values and OUV rather than adversely impacting and affecting it. I mentioned earlier that there can also be questions of absence as well as positive activity. And clearly a number of World Heritage properties, particularly those in cultural contexts and urban areas, are important because of their utility to local communities. They are places where people live, where they worship, where they work. And where these places get beyond their normal working lives and capabilities, there can be an inherent tension and a problem between the conservation and the resources needed to look after the place and their ability to fulfill contemporary utility and useful functions. So what can be needed, and the case on screen is a historic city known as Zabid in Yemen, and well before the current situation with conflict in Yemen, this property, by virtue of changing social circumstances and changes to social and cultural uses, was becoming redundant. And so in this case, the factor that affects the property is the need for activity, the need for benign and sustainable development, the need to be able to sustain outstanding universal value and to deliver social and economic benefits by using heritage, by maintaining the sense of place and by contributing to the sense of well-being of inhabitants. So the factor here is not so much a physical threat or a threat of change, but a threat of degradation through becoming unused and not relevant. And then, of course, in the Arab part of the world, there are very sadly a large number of properties which are currently inscribed on the list of World Heritage in danger because of what are politely called other human activities. And while you would hope that this set of activities might not apply to the states parties and the properties participating in this session, it is necessary to look at impact of difficult circumstances such as civil unrest or deliberate destruction or even terrorism and acts of war. And it's relevant to remind you that a number of properties in the Middle East have been inscribed on the list in danger, not because of actual danger or actual damage as we see on screen here in the terrible case in Syria, but because of the threat that the civil unrest or the presence of conflict poses to the cultural resources. Finally, coming back to questions of infrastructure. Infrastructure, again, is a double-edged sword. And what is currently happening in the world, on the one hand, is a wonderful move towards change technologies, especially emerging technologies in the renewables sector. But it's important to be aware that these may have consequences for World Heritage properties. And a really interesting example is the case of the Champagne World Heritage Landscape, inscribed relatively recently. And the issue in the countryside surrounding Champagne with the transition to renewable energy through wind farming and what the effect of that transition might be on the wider landscape. So to be clear, in the before and after visualizations on screen, we see part of the Champagne wine producing landscape in the top image. And that's the World Heritage property in the foreground and the wider setting beyond. In the lower image, there is a selection of visualizations showing some wind farms that are under contemplation. And what is interesting in this case is that the state party is doing some very detailed and extensive work to understand both the cumulative impacts of new installations and appraisal methods, how to measure the visual impact and how it changes this cultural landscape in its setting. What is not being said is that visible wind turbines are bad, or that it's okay to put in visible wind turbines. What is being done is analysis to understand how this factor may affect those parts of the values that contribute to the outstanding universal value for which this property was inscribed. And at this point, I'm very pleased to hand over, I hope, using technology, to my colleague from IUCN, Kathy Zizka, who will examine factors that affect mixed and natural sites. Kathy.
Actually, I think we're going to have to switch presenters at this point.
You can, if you need time, please do go ahead. And we are not in a rush this morning.
I've unshared.
Okay, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are just changing the slides. Just one moment. Just make this full screen.
Yeah, good. It's on. Yeah.
Yes, it's clear now. Okay, it's skipped down. So Eugene just needs to leave us at this point. So we're just going to continue from my screen. Excellent. Okay. All right. So good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Nice to see everybody on the call. As we said, so my name is Kathy Zizka from IUCN. So I work on monitoring and conservation work within the IUCN World Heritage Programme. So I will just continue on with another example after Richard on services infrastructure. So another example that we have in terms of infrastructure that we see in various World Heritage sites is dams and hydropower. So this is an example that is applicable to various different properties. And so dams can be they can be a range of sizes and impacts on the property. So they could be very small, providing energy to local communities, or they could be very, very large and potentially have a significant impact on the OUV of a property. And so this is an example where it's important to look at the potential or probable impacts on a World Heritage property. So, for example, some localized impacts, direct impacts from dams could be through the habitat destruction from the actual construction of a dam within or very close to a World Heritage property. And many of you will know certain regulations around building dams. But as Eugene and Richard have already said, what we also need to consider is the wider landscape and the impacts not only from very close to World Heritage sites, but from the wider landscape beyond that. And that's where we potentially might also have indirect and also cumulative impacts of developments that are ongoing. So here on the screen, you can see this is an example from Wood Buffalo National Park in Canada. You can see in the green area, this is the core, the World Heritage Site, and circled in orange is the proposed site, which is a hydroelectric dam called Site C. And as you can see, it might be difficult for you to see the scale bar, but the distance from the dam and the actual World Heritage property is over 500 kilometers. So the reason we raise this example is that it shows that developments that are quite a long way away from a World Heritage property also have the potential to property. And that's where it's important to consider the potential wider impacts from further away. And then also look at developments in the context of the pressures that are already on that particular site. So for areas that are already under pressure, a new development could also add a level that by itself, it may not be a threat to the property, but as a cumulative impact with the threats that are existing, it could be. And so this is an important point to also take into account when considering services infrastructure. So the next factor is pollution. So pollution comes in various different sources, from various different sources, and it can have a whole range of different impacts on your particular World Heritage property. So it could be local, or it could be across a wider ecosystem level as well. So for example, within a site, we could have solid waste management, there could be sewage management associated with tourism, litter from visitors, and that relates also to visitor management, people bringing things into your property. And so there are a range of different sources within the property, but then again, looking beyond the site. So examples of pollution from outside a property could be marine debris on remote islands. And the examples I show here on the screen, left-hand side on the photo, the top left is a baby albatross chick in the Papahanaumokuakea monument in Hawaii. It's a Marine World Heritage Site, and as you can see, it's surrounded by 2 pieces of plastic, and this is a very remote area. So this is where you can see that impacts of pollution can come from outside the site and can actually come from a long way away and impact the World Heritage property. On the photo on the right-hand side also comes from this site, and this is a local program where you can see marine debris is being pulled out of the marine space in order to address pollution and to help the protection of the property and its OUV. So another example of pollution from outside of a World Heritage property could be in an area that's more built up, where you have agricultural activities ongoing around the site. So the photo on the bottom left is from Djoudj, which is in Senegal, so the Djoudj National Bird Sanctuary, and in the surrounding area around Djoudj, for example, we have a lot of rice agriculture, riziculture, and there is potential from these areas for the runoff from this agricultural activity to impact the World Heritage property, the wetland, and to cause issues such as growth of other species, such as typha, which then create issues for the World Heritage Site. So this is where you can see issues are also on flow-on effects from outside of the property. Then we also have industrial operations from mine tailings, other factors such as air pollution. So air pollution can come from a long way away. It can impact not only natural sites, but cultural sites. So there are a whole range of different pollution factors for you to consider. Next example is looking at invasive alien species or hyperabundant species. So these can be a real threat to either unique species or particular environments that are associated with OUV. So World Heritage properties will often contain a very unique group of species. They might be the very last bastion for an endangered species. And so this is a potential threat or a real threat in various different World Heritage properties where invasives are actually impacting. So this photo here is a Norway rat. It's in the French Austral Lands and Seas, which is a French property in the sub-Antarctic region. As you can see on the photo, this is another example where it's a very remote site and we have threats impacting this particular property. And so invasive species you can link across to other factors. So if we go back to the agricultural pollution example I gave just before for Djoudj in Senegal, you can see that the pollution is causing the growth of invasive species, which then potentially threatens the World Heritage values. So there is crossover between the factors as well. Also, another one in this sense is visitor management as an important other factor, because what can happen is that if visitors are not appropriately managed, they come into the property, they can carry in species that can then impact the very important local species within that property. And just to raise for you, there's a new IAS in World Heritage report, which out just in September, which showed that 119 of the 241 natural sites, so we now have more, but this was based on the last IUCN Outlook report, are actually, so 119 out of 241, so a high proportion of the natural World Heritage properties are impacted by invasive species. And for many, this is an area where information still needs to be recorded and provided. So the next example is around biological resource use or modification. So this can include examples like logging or hunting, fishing, aquaculture activities, and other examples. So the case study I provide here is the rainforests of the Atsinanana, which is in Madagascar, just off the coast of East Africa. And this World Heritage property faces some threats around the extraction of precious wood species. So species such as rosewood, palisander, ebony for international trade. And there are links across various different conventions as well in terms of managing international trade. And so this is just an example where we can see how resource extraction impacts sites, but it's a very large range, and I'm sure you will find there are very different factors within your particular sites. There's a wide range that might be impacting your site, and this, as Eugene said before, this is an opportunity to really look at these issues and take it as an opportunity to look at management as well. The next example is around physical resource extraction. So this includes mining, oil and gas, quarrying, or water extraction. And so in this case, it's about looking again at not only the impacts directly within or close to the site, but also indirect and cumulative impacts on OUV. So this example here that you can see on the map is the green area with the black dotted line. You can see is World Heritage Site. And then the buffer zone around it and surrounding areas in lighter green areas. This is the particularly from the Montnimba Strict Nature Reserve in Guinea. It's a transboundary property with Côte d'Ivoire. And so in this case, you can see the little red box is actually a mining concession where there's currently an environmental impact assessment that's being completed to look at the potential impacts of that development on the World Heritage property. And so this is an example where direct and both indirect impacts need to be considered. And just to raise also the no-go commitment, which many of you will be aware of, where we have leading extractive industry companies that have committed to not undertaking extraction within World Heritage properties. And so all of these factors are important to consider when looking at the potential or impacts of physical resource extraction, and give you an opportunity to consider management, appropriate use of developments, or potentially moving or amending these. Next one is around climate change and severe weather events. So this can be anything from fires, cyclones, flooding events, coral bleaching in marine spaces. And so the examples that I show here on the top left and right, so the two top photos are from the island of Socotra. Socotra is off the coast of Yemen. And this is from cyclones over the last few years, where you can see both flooding events and also the uprooting of these trees. These are very special and part of the outstanding universal value of the property. On the bottom, you can see coral reef ecosystems. Many coral reefs are being impacted by climate change and severe weather. We see coral bleaching events. And then on the right, over the last year, we've seen various impacts with fire as well in these systems. And just to point out, the new IUCN World Heritage Outlook 3 report has just been launched yesterday. We have a webinar on the 8th of December. So we invite you all to please join us for that. But the reason I bring this up is that this Outlook report, which also looks at these different factors and impacts, has identified that climate change is the biggest threat to natural World Heritage sites, with over a third of the sites impacted. And so many of you will have potential or also so actual impacts at the moment, or may also see potential future impacts of climate change or severe weather events on your sites across a whole range of sites in the region in future. Then one of the final slides is around management and institutional factors. Now, the management and the governance of a property is all-encompassing, so it includes everything around the governance and management. So this includes the legal framework, the management structures, management plans, financial resources, human resources, looking at research programs and monitoring. And each of these is very important for the protection and the management and the conservation of the outstanding universal value to ensure the OUV of your property. And there could be strengths in one area, but potential for improvement in other areas. And so this is another opportunity for you to review these and to look at where there may be potential threats for OUV and where there are real strengths for your particular site in terms of reporting. And then finally, I'd just like to end with the other factors section. So as Anatole said, this is an opportunity for you to look at other factors that might be associated with your site that are perhaps not identified in the categories. So there are many categories that we already have, but there might be other ones or new ones. So as an example here, this is a photo from Amsterdam where you can see the large lettering that's been put up. It's been an opportunity for people to take photos, to share on social media. And what has happened is that through this social media sharing, there's been an increase in awareness raising and around the property and the sharing of the property. However, which is positive for communication, but then this potentially might also impact increasing tourism and bringing more people to the site, which puts more pressure on the site, and then also needs to be managed by the site managers. And so you can see there are factors, as we said, that are both that can potentially threaten a property, but have an opportunity to provide positive effects. And that's where in the questionnaire, this could be an example where you could tick both positive or negative. So thank you very much. We hope that between the three of us, we've given you an opportunity, some examples, and I'm just trying to unshare this, but let me just close this. So thank you very much from the three of us. We are here for any questions that you also have, and I will leave it there and hand back to Anatole. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and Eugene and Richard for the very enlightening presentation. I think we've had a very thorough look at the factors and how they can be defined and what is behind the list that national focal points and site managers will find in their questionnaires. Very happy to pass the floor to Valentino Etova from the Policy and Statutory Meetings Unit at the World Heritage Center, who will talk briefly on the lessons learned from other regions and also give us some more information into how all the work you've just done on Chapter 4 is going to have implications for the rest of the questionnaire. Valentino, you have the floor.
Thank you, Anatole. I hope you can hear me and can see my screen. Please confirm.
We can.
Oh, that's great. So my presentation, good morning and good afternoon and good evening to all of you. My presentation is going to be quite quick, brief, because most of them has been covered by Catherine, by Eugene, by Richard, by yourself, Anatole. So I will be quite quick because I think that our participants would like also to ask questions. So I have a problem with, okay. So I'm going to skip all these factors, which have just been covered just clearly by Catherine, so that I will skip this. One of the lessons learned that you have, as Anatole has mentioned, and that at the end of each chapters, you have this comment box where you can comment on the factors. It was a major problem for us in other regions where we have to look at the comments. This is a recommendation. Please, when you're making comments at the end of the last comment box, please refer to which question. Sometimes it's not quite clear for us to understand to what question you are referring to. So this is a slight recommendation. Just like for question, for example, what we are having on the screen and concerning building developments factor groups. So that says that for question 4.1.2, this is the comment we would like to put, etc., etc. So This need to know that chapter 4, factors affecting the properties, with all the 76 secondary factors you need to assess, is very linked to chapter 12. So any change you make in the chapter 4, you have to go back to chapter 12 because it is responsive and it generates new questions or new tabs, which will bring you to assess, or if you have did it, you have considered at the end that a factor is not relevant to the site. This will also impact the chapter 12. So we recommend you strongly, time you make a modification in chapter 4, you have to go back to chapter 12, because then the questionnaire will not be considered at 100% because there would be new question being generated in chapter 12. It is the same for chapter 11 concerning identification of priority management needs. When you are assessing a factor, please note that you, on the criteria tab, the criteria should be as been adopted by the Heritage Committee. So you can find this criteria on the OUV, which is in chapter 3, where we have uploaded the the statement of outstanding universal value. If not, please just contact us. But normally, for all of them we have verified, there is OUV when it has been adopted by the committee. And in this tab, we have noticed that some of the people filling in the questionnaire has put other things than the criteria. You just need to put the criteria and the attributes which is being affected, and the attribute of which should be as the one that you have identified in question 3.2. Question 3.2, chapter 3 is on statement of outstanding universal value. There's only three questions in this chapter, so you might want to go back to see what you have identified as attributes. And then please note that if you do not fill any of these tabs, for example, criteria, action, monitoring, time frame, agency, and comments, the questionnaire will not consider as 100%. So we especially in the comment tabs, we will recommend you to put no comments if you have no comments to say, so that the system consider that you have answered this question. Question is. Please note that all of the tabs need to be filled in, the question itself need to be filled in English or in French, which was something that we have found that many tabs was filled in a different language, and it was not easy for us to proceed with analysis. As has mentioned by Anatole and Eugene, that you have the SOC database that you might want to look at, and also that some things that I would like to point out, that this questionnaire, this filling in the questionnaire is as you have to assess factors, negative factors, positive factors, and there is a lot of questions. This is not a test. We want you to put the to put the situation as close as to the reality, what's happening. This is help us also for you yourself to assess your site in a way that you will find what is going on, what is positive going on, and what is negative, what might need actions. And this also will help you as national focal points to see to have a bigger picture within the countries. Maybe some factors might be affecting not one side, but many sites within your country, so that this is very helpful, will be very helpful for you. And in regional wise, this also could help to get a much bigger picture of one or many factors which might affecting the properties in the region. So this is it from my side, and I would like to thank you very much, Anatole, and it's back to you.
Thank you very much, Valentino. So before we open the floor for questions, I just wanted to take you very briefly through what Valentino has just mentioned, which is the chapter 12 of the questionnaire. Because as Valentino explained, all of the input on factors that you have given in chapter 4 then gets pulled into the summary and conclusions for this question 12.1, which are the factors affecting the property, the summary version. It highlights most important positive and negative factors, up to 10 of each, that have been highlighted in chapter 4 and for further review in chapter 12. And so, as you have seen, you will be asked a number of questions, indeed to be filled out in English or French for the questionnaire. This is a good opportunity to draw the attention of national focal points as you go through section 2 for verification before submission, to make sure that all of the questions have been answered. Have been translated or answered in either of the working languages of the convention. We are very aware that for many site managers, they may use translations and national language versions of the questionnaire, but please make sure that all of the answers, including to this, are in English or French. And so you'll be asked to define criteria based on the statement of OUV, as Valentino explained, and you will be asked what actions are being taken to deal with the negative factors. Hopefully the answer is none. This is a demo version, of course, and you will be asked as well what monitoring is in place. These are all free comments, so you can feel free to I think that we have some degree of character limit on them, but you can elaborate a little bit. There is a question of time frame. There's the identification of the agency that will be responsible for the implementation of these actions. The opportunity to provide some comments. So this, as always, there is space to discuss any further information or make any additional comments in the individual individual tab for comments. I believe that there is no, unless I'm wrong, no, there is no general comment on this. And as Valentino very rightly pointed out, and at the risk of repeating ourselves, when you make comments, please do indicate, because the comment boxes are generally for entire sub-chapters of the questionnaire. Please do indicate which exact question it refers to. It does make our lives a lot easier. And if you have any questions about any of these, of course, please do not hesitate to reach out to us and to ask us any questions you may have about the questionnaire as you fill it out. We're very happy to respond. And just to pick up on a point that I've seen raised in the chat, if we do not answer an email that you have sent to wh-periodic reporting, sometimes there are quite a lot of them coming in. Do not hesitate to ask again. We are very resilient and resistant to harassment, and we will very happily get back to you. We are not ignoring anyone, but it's very easy for a single message to sometimes get buried under her 50 other ones and disappear. So don't hesitate to ask again if you don't see us responding within a couple of days. Usually, it may mean that either your message has landed in a spam filter or that it may not have reached us quite as well as it should have. Very well. That's about it in terms of presentation at my end. Let me unshare the screen. And I don't know if our advisory bodies have anything to add for chapter 12. Otherwise, I may open the floor for questions. Okay. In that case, if anyone has questions, Michelle has kindly been monitoring the chat for us. So is there anything crucial? We would ask simply that you raise your hand if you have questions so that we may give you the floor. We have quite a few participants.
I have got a question. Sir, I have got a question.
Yes, please.
Most of the questions in the questionnaire are very subjective. some factors are both positive and negative. In that case, what quantitative indicators can be used to fill up the question? Can you explain with an example?
So you have the possibility of indicating that a factor is both positive and negative. And that is then up to your assessment of how this factor is affecting the property in situ. There is, the list of factors is meant to be broad and to encompass as many World Heritage properties as possible. But if, depending on the situation, normally with the range of questions that are asked about each factor, you should be able to give us an idea of where, when, and how a factor impacts a property, either positively or negatively, or both. But if you have a specific example for us, please don't hesitate.
Hello?
Yes?
This is 4.8.6, impacts of tourism, visitation, recreation. So we have given relevant. So impact is current. Then impact is negative. Then origin is potential, trend outside, and stable, increasing. So in certain cases, my question is there. Can you explain with an example?
Yes, I believe e-commerce had a contribution for this. Please, Richard, go ahead.
Well, thank you both. I think the question about tourism is one that is going to affect many properties, and there are a number of ways to deal with it, but an obvious way is to divide the tourism. So for example, ascribing tourism as increased economic activity through more tourists, that might be one factor, which might be a positive factor, which might contribute to the local community, to the economy, which might be providing resources to assist with the conservation and management of the property. But a second factor also about tourism can be identified, which might be increasing visitor numbers and congestion, which is having physical impacts on the property. I mean, there are some properties in the Asia Pacific region that attract literally millions of visitors and have serious congestion issues. Well, the visitor congestion can be identified as the factor. So my suggestion is where you have a combination of positive and negative consequences from a particular influence, unpack them and present them as different factors within the standard categories.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any other questions? I had seen personally in the chat that Tournou from our Category 2 Center in Witrap had made a very interesting comment on the relationships of the questionnaire to the 2011 recommendation on the historic urban landscape. Marino, I don't know if you're still here, if you want to elaborate on this, because I think it's really very relevant, and we will have a specific session on this next year as part of our Thursday meetings.
Hello, I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, absolutely.
I think I don't have access to the video. Thank you so much for this, all the meetings you're organizing, and this one was also again very interesting on the threats and the factors. Yes, on the historic urban landscape approach, also picking up on what was said by Eugène. Definitely looking at the larger landscape is something which is important, and this is what the historic urban landscape recommends. it's not necessary to be, let's say, not look at it in sort of ticking the box regarding the HUL. It's really the recommendation itself is a guideline to look at aspects and things that can be put forward. On the World Heritage website, under the cities program, there's actually the results of a meeting that took place in Japan early in January, with some more detailed elements, guidelines for the implementation of HUL. So WH-Rap is really at your service on these issues if you want to further look at how the HUL approach can help. And we're also finalizing a sort of assessment on the state of conservation of World Heritage sites in Asia Pacific region, focusing on what happened between the end of the second cycle and to date. So we will share that with you and be happy to further discuss that with the center. So basically, we're at your disposal and very happy to provide further information on the HUL approach.
Thank you very much, Mainon, and we'll also be sure to add the link that you've mentioned and the resources to the presentation that will be shared after the session, as always. Perfect. Akane has, I believe, already done it in the chat as well for everybody. That's fantastic. Michelle, do we have anything from the comments? I'm not sure I've managed to scroll through everything. I
think we have a new hand that is raised, so we can take
perfect.
the hand.
Please.
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
This is the Periyar Tiger Reserve. We are the site managers for the Western Ghats. So one question is that when we consider like factor, so what is the distance from that particular site? For example, if we consider a dam, that could be away from that particular property. So is there any criteria or any distance factor in considering that factor while doing the questionnaire? I hope it's clear for you.
It is. I think our advisory bodies might answer that question.
Well, it's Richard from ICOMOS initially. The critical issue is not the distance or even the visibility from the property. The critical issue is the relationship with the activity to the attributes that contribute to outstanding universal value. So for something like a dam, there may be serious consequences upstream if the dam is inundating an area that is important to the ecology or the cultural landscape of a World Heritage property. And the committee, in that case, actually has a clear policy that parts of World Heritage properties should not be inundated. But a dam or other infrastructure may also have consequences in terms of changes that are brought about in economic activities. So if there is a change to traditional agricultural activities, for example, in a cultural landscape, and these activities are one of the attributes that are mentioned in the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value, then that would be a factor as well. So it doesn't become a question of the distance, it becomes a question of how the activity might change the attributes of the property that are expressed through the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value. And I suspect that my colleague Kathy from IUCN also wants to comment.
Hi, so just quickly before we pass on to Kathy and Eugene, who both have their hands up, those who have their hands up and have their question answered or are getting their question answered, please lower your hand so that we can see the next individuals who will take the floor. Anatol, I'm not sure if we pass to Kathy, then Eugene, or other way around.
Yes. Well, let's do Kathy first and Eugene then. Kathy, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think Richard has covered this point very well, so there isn't really much to add to what Richard said, except that the focus is about specifically the values, and so the attributes that constitute the OUV can be very different depending on what your particular site is. So as Richard said, it's all about looking specifically at the attributes of OUV, and then to consider whatever development it is, whether it's a dam or an extension to a city, it could be a new tourism development. It's all about the potential impacts of that on those core values of outstanding universal value. But I think Richard covered most of those points, so thank you very much.
Eugene, do you have something to add?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to also add a little bit more to what Richard and Kathy has just said. I think it's really important for you to go through the process in steps, and that's exactly how the periodic reporting is actually composed of. The way that you actually start with identifying the OUV and attributes should come into play exactly at this moment when you're trying to identify the factors. So on one hand, you have the OUV and attributes set out. On the other hand, you have all the diverse ranges of factors that you could consider. And then it really all depends on the relationship between these two different slots of things that can actually then give you that analysis whether or not it's going to impact the OUV or not. And as mentioned very eloquently, it's the World Heritage Convention is a values-based convention. So you really need to focus on not just the boundaries, but on the actual attributes that carry the OUV, and make a relationship between the factors. So going step by step might help a little bit more in identifying them and making that final sort of conclusion of whether or not this is a factor that would be relevant or not.
Thank you very much. I saw there was another hand raised.
So yes, most of these hands. Yes, we do have a new hand raised.
I've got a question about section 1 of the questionnaire. There was a question regarding the expenditures. We wonder if it's all about all the budget of the government, or it's just about the cultural sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been an important lesson learned from previous regions as well. As we had mentioned in the intro to section 1, the question on expenditure from section 1 and any questions in section 2 as well about expenditure, I don't remember if there are any left, are related to the implementation for heritage and World Heritage Management specifically. So it is not the percentages that you are asked to give are percentages of the GED that are affected to World Heritage Management and protection. So usually it is a very small percentage, but it's been while it would be great if 20% of the GDP were affected to heritage management, obviously a country has many other needs. So we know that usually we're more in the 0.something% of the country's annual budget. So it concerns, that's what it concerns. Valentino, I know this is one of your favorite questions, so I'm sure you have something to add.
Thank you, Anatol. Thank you very much, Anatol. This is a very question that come out for all regions. I just want to clarify, it concerns all heritage, be it natural cultural heritage, be it world heritage or not. So I would like to confirm this, that it is generally heritage in your country.
Okay, do we have any other questions on factors affecting the property? Or anything from the chat that we have missed?
Chat's good. We've answered all of the questions either through text or through the question and answer session now. So I think unless anybody else raises their hand or comments in chat, I'll leave it to you.
Catherine?
Yes, thank you. I just saw in the chat that someone had asked about guidelines for development in the buffer zone. So I thought it would just be useful to also share that we could share some more information about various webinars and information that's being developed around impact assessment and best practice. Oh, I'm sorry, I moved my microphone. Best practice around World Heritage and assessing potential impacts of developments. So we have both the heritage and environmental impact assessments guidance tools from developed by the advisory bodies, but we also have some recent webinars that can be shared with you as well. So we can make sure to share that information for anyone who might like that.
Excellent, thank you very much, and we'll make sure to add links as well. As always, we will share the video recording of this meeting as well as all of the presentations with the national focal points via email after the session, and this can be forwarded to the site managers, of course, at any point. And all of the materials for the national focal points is also saved on our Teams platform every week. We just as a reminder, this isn't straight away, but we have scheduled for one of the Thursday sessions at the beginning of next year. I believe that we have a session specifically dedicated on questions of impact assessments. So we will also have some opportunity to discuss this at a later date in more detail, obviously with our colleagues from the advisory bodies who have done a lot of work on this specific topic in recent years. And I see Eugene has already shared some links in the chat, which is great. Okay, any other comments or questions?
I saw Richard's hand is raised.
Yes, Richard, thank you.
Thank you, Feng. Thank you, Anatole. I just, in relation to webinars and resources, there is also readily available on the ICROM website recordings of 2 seminars about heritage impact assessment for World Heritage, which were presented during October. And while they don't deal with specific sites, they do deal very comprehensively with the approach to heritage impact assessment, and they contain more examples than we've had capacity to talk about this evening. So I would also recommend those webinar recordings to those who are grappling with issues such as development outside a buffer zone, which might affect attributes, because as Eugene says, it's all about values, not about physical boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And Eugene has shared the links, and we'll make sure to integrate them as well in the summaries that we send out to everyone. Okay. Anything else? Otherwise, I'll pass the floor to Fang to close today's meeting. As always, if you have any questions after this session or any query about the questionnaire, do not hesitate to message us either via the Teams platform for national focal points or via email at wh-periodicreporting@unesco.org, and we will do our very best to answer you as quickly as possible. Yes, in that spirit, Fang, I'll let you have the last word for today.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Anatole. Thank you very much for all the participants for your kind attention and active participation in today's session. in fact, the training sessions was a new way of adaptation due to the COVID-19 sanitary situation. And we are making all our efforts, I call it as additional workload, because the periodical reporting exercise, it is the prime responsibility of the state parties. We are doing our best to provide resource materials, training, orientation sessions. But at the end of the day, the questionnaire, I think all the tasks are in front of you. So I think a special word of thanks to our friends and colleagues from the ICOMOS and IUCN, Eugene June, Richard Maki, and Cassie Zeshka for sharing their knowledge with us through their presentations. I think some keywords through their presentations, the list of factors affecting the property is related to the impact of OUV and attributes of the property. So linking criteria to attributes of the property and check the factors from a broader landscape or setting perspective beyond the boundaries of the property. And it should also be stressed that if the statement of OUV are to underpin management and conservation, it is essential that there is a clear understanding of the link between OUV and the property's attributes and define the factors affecting the property. The factors affecting the properties are also interlinked between the two reporting mechanisms vis-a-vis reactive monitoring and the periodical reporting, and it is intended to preserve the OUV of the property. With over 1,100 properties currently on the World Heritage List, and despite the ever-increasing number of properties whose state of conservation is under review by the World Heritage Committee, in the end, only a limited number of properties actually benefits from the attention of the international community at a given time. So therefore, periodical reporting is especially important, as positive trends or interventions may otherwise not be acknowledged by the World Heritage Committee, and we have made sure that there will be space in the periodical reporting questionnaire to highlight positive development or negative development and group practice examples. I think the state parties may wish to share. So checking the factors affecting the property with all the records, documentation, committee decisions, and the recommendations is a very useful exercise. So in this regard, I would say that this exercise is also of great importance for all of us to formally oriented towards the future, learning from the experience of the past by focusing the integration of a sustainable development perspective. So I think this is the key words. In the coming weeks, we will continue to hold subject-specific training sessions on the contents of the questionnaire, and the invitations will be shared with you ahead of time. The next session on the 16th of December will be dedicated to the Pacific Small Islands Developing States. This was done in collaboration with UNESCO API Office. We hope that this will mobilize the effective participation and submission of the questionnaire from the Pacific region. On the 17th of December, we will have a training session on reporting for natural heritage. We welcome your participation. I thank you very much and wish you all the best. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Another call is also running for the Executive Board of UNESCO. Yeah.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.